want to introduce our speaker, Dave Crimmin. He is from the Brown class of 72. He is a senior consultant at Bose Corporation in Framingham, Massachusetts. There he serves as program manager and faculty for several of the Bose leadership programs. He also delivers core management and education programs on influence, management of change, and communications. In addition to that, he coaches mid and senior level managers. He holds a master's in counseling and consulting psychology from Harvard, a master's from Wesleyan University, and a certificate in organizational development from Columbia Teachers College. He has taught graduate level management courses at BU, Lesley University, and Cambridge College. At Cambridge, he's currently an adjunct professor of organizational behavior. In addition, Dave is a certified executive coach from the Babson College Executive Education Program. He is also an executive member of the Academy of Management, where he regularly presents at professional conferences. And last but not least, he is a fabulous Brown alum whose father and son also attend Brown, which must be why he stays so loyal, even though he's attended so many other schools. Dave, we're thrilled to have you with us today.
Well, thank you, Heather. I see you've been doing some research down there in Providence. Okay. Well, I'm pleased to have this opportunity to share with all of you a little bit of what I've personally learned about networking, and also some things that I've researched and I've used in teaching in my work with managers in terms of their networking as part of career success. So I thought I'd start off with a poll, and let me just say I'm doing this for two reasons. First, I think it'll help me tailor my remarks and also make sure I cover what people might be interested in, because I could easily do several hours on networking. And second, I'd like to give everyone else in the webinar today a sense of who else you're joining. So the poll is up. If you could check the box for when you graduated from Brown, and also how you would describe your current status.
People are quickly answering the poll. There are a lot of people on the call today, so it's taking the system a few minutes to tabulate it. And so we'll give the poll about 30 seconds to a minute, and then we will close it out. But we really appreciate everyone joining us today for this webinar on networking. The graph is filling up pretty evenly across the board between class years and how they would describe themselves. So it looks like we have a really varied audience. I'm going to give people about 10 more seconds, 20 seconds. Sometimes WebEx tells me how long I need to give. And then we will give the poll results here. Okay, so Dave, you should be able to see the answers to your questions.
Yes, I do, and we certainly do have a diverse group of folks. I see that there's a group that I'd probably call younger alumni relative to when I graduated, as well as some alums that are in mid-career or possibly are re-entering the workforce. I also see in the other question, the answer, that there's a fair number of people looking for a job, either currently employed or unemployed, and a number of people, which actually I'm glad to see, who are employed but not actually looking for a job. And I believe we have one person who just stumbled across this webinar on the internet. Okay, so just moving ahead, if we could close the poll, Heather.
I'm doing that right now. And we'll move right ahead here. Oops, for some reason it's not. There we are.
Okay, so that'll help me begin talking about networking in terms of what people are interested in. But I do want to say, and I'll probably repeat this several times, that I encourage you to ask questions and that Heather will help relay those to me. Um, just a few things in terms of where I'd like to go today and give you a quick overview. Before I do a deep dive, I want to first define what I mean by networking and talk a little bit about some of those aspects of that definition. And then I want to move on and describe 3 stages of the networking process that I see. After that quick overview, I want to dive into each stage, look at some specific tactics, some activities that I think are related to that phase, and hopefully give some examples that might be helpful to people. And then if we have some time before the end, I'd like to spend a little bit of time talking about the characteristics or what you might think of as the competencies of people who are very successful in networking. I think it's worth looking at what they bring to the table and how we might learn from them, and in some cases just copy what they do that proves to be successful. And again, I want to provide the opportunity to respond to questions, so please use the chat feature to communicate that with Heather. You'll notice that the definition I'm offering for networking includes this notion of getting help that is both personal and professional. And I think it's very important to say that these 2 aspects of networking are not mutually exclusive. In fact, you may have a personal network that becomes very helpful in finding a job, and you can also have a professional network that helps you with your own personal growth, might help you examine your motivation and your goals. Usually a personal network is a little better in terms of giving you feedback, both positive and constructive, or who simply gives you emotional support as you deal with the inevitable challenges that come with any career or any job. So I encourage people to resist the idea that their professional network is solely for finding a job or their personal network is totally unrelated to their career. In my experience, I know a number of people who have come across jobs through pure serendipity within their personal network instead of within a disciplined networking effort professionally. In fact, in my own experience, I was working in the Worcester, Massachusetts area, and my employer asked me to serve on a local nonprofit board of a company that my company happened to support. And I was willing to do it. I was interested in what the board was about. It was an educational board. And so I took a position on the board for 2 years, and during that time I met a woman who was a self-employed consultant. Her work overlapped with mine. We just had a few casual conversations, and then about a year after my term on the board ended, I got a call from her, and she asked me if I had any interest in working in healthcare. So one thing led to another, and I joined her at one of the largest group medical practices in the Boston area called Harvard Vanguard. And then after a couple of years, as my manager, she left. And at that point, I took over her job as Director of Training and Organizational Development. Another 2 years went by, and I got another call from her. And this time she asked if I'd consider joining her at the Bose Corporation. So I point out that, based on just that random meeting in a volunteer role where I really wasn't looking to find another job, out of that I obtained 3 different positions. And this leads me to the idea of the objectives of networking. And I think for many people, especially alumni on the call that are younger alumni, networking seems synonymous with finding a job or finding the next job. And I certainly understand that. But I think that having that kind of limited focus on networking can actually undermine the overall idea of networking and what I'm trying to get across. So I'll say a little more about this later, but I would just point out that the objectives of networking can include many things beyond just getting a job, including things like learning more about a field, building relationships with people who have a personal affinity with us, like a mentor or even mentoring others, or simply just following our interests outside of a professional area. And I think the distinction that we might see that is talked about is the academics like to use these terms, task-based versus expressive networks. And I think it's a distinction without a difference. There certainly are networks that are based on getting something accomplished, and there are networks that are based on personal support, more emotional, meeting our needs. But as a whole, I think networking should be approached as a seamless activity that you're constantly doing and not applying these artificial distinctions. I think another area of networking that ought to be commented on is this idea of the internal versus external objectives of networking. Most of the jobs, actually, that people get in their career come from internal networks. I did a little bit of arithmetic for a presentation I gave students on campus in January. And I looked at my career, and I've been with 9 different organizations. 7 of those organizations I joined based on a personal connection I had with people. And I've held at least 22 positions by my count. So if you take out those 7 interviews that I had that got me a job through a personal network, that leaves about 15 jobs, or actually 13 jobs that I got based on my internal networks. So by internal networks and jobs, I'm talking about promotions or new assignments. But also internal networking is where people get the information and sometimes the contacts that help them perform their current job even better. It allows them to succeed in what they're doing through building an internal network. And in my experience, nothing works better in terms of finding your next job as succeeding in your present job. So I just want to emphasize this idea of networking being a lifelong activity. Someone once mentioned to me, and I since have seen it as the title of a book, that you need to dig your well before you're thirsty. Or as one Bose manager said to me a few years ago, the time to build a network is not when you need it. Now, for those of you that might find yourself a little behind in the game, and obviously that's why you're attending or listening to this webinar, I'm not trying to be negative about that, but as you find your next job or as you find your first job, what I'm saying is you need to constantly be networking for the future because you will need it again. Okay, I want to look at the 3 phases or stages of networking. We begin with assessing or getting a sense of who's currently in our network. And we want to get a sense of both the overall number of people that are in our network as well as the nature of who are the nodes that are on our network. This assessment phase can usually help us uncover where there are gaps in our network based on our job or our career goals. The next stage is building, and I will talk about how to use this building stage to expand your network or to strengthen or fill in the gaps that you identified in assessing. I'll talk about some of the tactics to use in building the network. And finally, we have the stage of network that I call maintaining. Now, I've met a number of people who do the first 2 stages but fail to maintain the network and almost, in many cases, have to start from scratch when they need to find another job. So I'm going to talk about each of these stages in turn, but before I do that, I want to check with Heather and see if there are any questions. Is there anything that people are
okay. Let's
dying
move
to
on
ask?
to assessment right now, and then we can cover some after that. How about that?
That's great. Okay, so when I talk about assessing, what I mean is looking at both the number and the nature of the people who are currently in your network. And I think it's important to repeat what I said earlier about both your professional and personal networks, and to think about all the possible networks that you have, all the possible nodes in those different networks. So if you're thinking first about your professional network, you might have something like LinkedIn, Plaxo. You might have professional associations that you belong to. You might have a contact manager that you've built up over the years that's actually a database that you use. But you also, I think, need to think about personal networks in a very deliberate sense. So in a formal sense, you have Facebook or some of the other forms of social media, but beyond that, I'd encourage you to think about the people you know through your church, people you know through coaching the town soccer team, people you know through social or community associations, people you know through alumni associations. There's over 80,000 alumni, and that's just one school. There's just one count at Brown that I'm aware of. So if you've done graduate work, or if you know people through other forms of alumni associations, you want to start gathering information on that. Sometimes you have to register to access the directories in those networks. And also people that you know through volunteer organizations like the PTSO, if you're on this town planning committee, the Friends of the Local Library, even your neighbors. And I guess I'm assuming that you know your neighbors there. But all of those informal, social, personal networks, I think you want to begin giving some structure and count to. So as you assess your current network, I think there's a number of ways that you might make that useful as you get all these names together. And this probably involves a number of sublists and taking cuts of the data to look at how your network really plays out. What does it consist of? I know that if I go into LinkedIn, and if you look under network statistics, if you use LinkedIn, it gives you a breakdown of how many connections you have, second level, third level, but it also will give you a geographical breakdown. So I know if I go into LinkedIn, it'll tell me that 21% of my network is located in the greater Boston area, and I have smaller percentages in New York, Chicago, I believe San Francisco. And it'll also give you an industry cut of where your contacts are. And I think this is vital, especially if you're in a situation where you can relocate for a job, where you're thinking of moving from one industry to another, where you get that kind of cut. Another cut I personally think is very valuable is looking at age. Now, if you're a younger alum, that's a no-brainer because a lot of the people that you want to meet and interview with or get leads from are older alums who are employed or are in positions of responsibility. But I also think it works the other way. In my position, I'm constantly training managers about how to manage the workers they have, and these workers include Gen X, Gen Y, the millennials, or whatever the latest term is. And I think it helps to have some contact with people from different generations on a networking basis to find out how they think, what do they aspire to. You can learn a lot from people who are using technology that you might not have. And finally, these last two bullets I think are very important in evaluating or assessing your network. Recency and viability. Recency is important because with some of the new software, it's very easy to accumulate a number of contacts. But you really need to assess people for recency. If you haven't talked to someone for 15 or 20 years, I'd hesitate to call them part of your network. And I think the same is true with viability. By viability, I mean if you called up someone in the network, would they recognize your name? Or if you tried to call them, would you even have valid phone numbers and contact information because you haven't talked to them in so long? The other thing in assessing your network involves visibility to what are known as second-level contacts. And I've included a little clip here from my LinkedIn account that I think is pretty dramatic. So in my LinkedIn database, I have 547 contacts. But look at if I went through those first-level contacts to the next level, there's over 100,000 people that I could potentially reach. And assuming that I had the energy and ambition to contact each one of those over 100,000, at the next level, there's more than 4.5 million people that I potentially could contact. And so as you assess your network, I think it's important to realize that who shows up at the first level is really just the beginning. Uh, and it's important to realize what that number might represent in terms of other contacts down the road. So, as Heather suggested, I'd like to pause at this point. Maybe we could do a poll and see if people have thought about how many people they currently have in their network. If you have a number in mind or even an estimate, what would you estimate is your current network?
So, Dave, as you can see, I've opened the poll for you, and people are quickly filling it out over on the side. Well, as you were talking, it made me think about people's networking and how networking has really changed. And I wonder if while people are answering this, if you couldn't just take a minute to talk to us about melding the difference between sort of traditional networking and the new social media networking.
Okay. Well, it's funny what's changed just in the last 5 or 6 years, because I remember all kinds of cartoons and jokes about younger people who were using Facebook, consistently, and suddenly their parents wanted to friend them. This was so off-putting. But I think just in the last 5 or 6 years, more and more people of my generation have gotten involved with things like Facebook, and it's not a big deal. It's not strange. It's not creepy to our kids, because there's so much to contact with now, even with other people in our generation. So that form of networking, if you haven't taken the jump into, I think it's well worth it. It can be a lot of fun. I think it can be a big time sink for some people. But if you're disciplined about it, I think it can actually help you in your professional networking. If people have not checked out some of the professional networking sites like LinkedIn or Plaxo, which are two that I use, I recommend doing that. It helps to have something to bring to the table in terms of experience, because the database, as I understand it, looks through what you offer and suggests other people that you could contact with based on where you worked and your affiliation as well as your occupation. So I would take a multi-pronged approach to networking. I'd use both the current very popular social networking sites as well as some of the more traditional approaches that are work-related or profession-related.
Would you use the different social networking sites different? LinkedIn, Facebook, Plaxo, how would you approach them differently?
Yeah, I would approach them differently. I would hold them apart. I wouldn't necessarily try to connect with everyone on Facebook that I had in my LinkedIn account or vice versa. Again, I think this has changed a little bit, but there was a lot of talk in the early years of Facebook that employers were using Facebook to check out prospective employees, especially younger people. So pictures from a toga party or something like that didn't always fly well with employers. So that's a caution. I think more and more people who are getting into the job market are aware of that. But just holding the two separate, I think, is a good idea. What I would also add, though, is if you have professional networking sites like Plaxo or LinkedIn, I've gotten away from Plaxo. I still have an account, but I try to look for people that I've connected with in Plaxo, move them over to LinkedIn, so I can have one-stop shopping.
That's a good idea.
In terms of a professional network.
So if you can see, the poll's finished, and I did upload the results if you want to take a moment to look at those, Dave.
Yeah, okay. Well, I'm not prepared to give a magic number. My number was a little over 500. I do work at networking, so maybe that reflects the number that people who work at networking should have. But, you could have a network of 40 to 100 people, and if they're the right people, that's all you need. I do look at nearly 10% of the people that have never counted, and I recommend that's something to do, just to get a sense of who's in there, not just the numbers, but also the nature of the people. And for those people that weren't able to answer, if that's an indication that you had neither an estimate nor count, I think it's worth doing.
Dave, I do
Okay.
have one other question that I wanted to bring up that has come in. What type of written tools should you use to share your bio and to start as you're assessing this network and you're going to reach out to start building it?
Right. Well, I mean, the typical written tool that people use is a resume, and I think if you are job searching and you're applying for specific positions, a resume is very appropriate. On the other hand, I think that using a bio, just a one-page bio, allows you to really distinguish yourself, humanize yourself, make who you are as a person come alive, and also, and I'll say more about this later, help build your brand. It's hard in the structure of a resume and the kind of information that it conveys to build a brand, but I think in a bio you can add a lot more personality and address a wider scope of who you are and what you're interested in. So I think that a lot of people underestimate the usefulness of a bio, so that's something that some of you might want to test out and maybe draft one and see how it sounds and possibly try it out on a few people and see how they respond.
A few other ideas I have come in, and I did just send them to you in terms of a question about what is Plaxo, a question about where did you find that information on LinkedIn that you were able to share with people on the last slide, and also maybe any tips about who to connect with on LinkedIn or precautions about who you connect with on LinkedIn.
Okay. Well, first of all, Plaxo, I think it's plaxo.com is a site very much like LinkedIn. If you looked on LinkedIn, and I think the tab at the top is My Network or something like that. Anyway, one of the major tabs, the drop-down choices include something called Network Statistics. And if you click on that, you'll see the information I displayed on the previous slide, as well as the industry cuts, the geographical cuts. I think there's actually some things on the fastest growing segments or industries that they include as well. Tips on Twitter, I've got to plead ignorance on that. I've resisted. I'm so overwhelmed by the technology that I've tried to master so far. I have not been into tweeting, so can't offer any help on that.
There are a couple of sites that I've gotten recently that I'll put on our Facebook about that. So watch for that this week if anyone's interested, or we'll put it out on Twitter. There's a couple of questions coming in about writing a bio, and I would like to save those to the end because I want to be sure you have so much great information that we get to, and there's also questions coming in about how to be a good networker, what if you're an introvert, and I think you're going to get to all of those. So how about we move through a little bit more and then we come back to questions.
Very good. Okay, so I want to make some comments about building your network. The first thing I think that helps is identifying your goal or goals. And again, this I want to reemphasize this idea that networking isn't simply about finding a job or finding the next job. Some of the best goals can be learning more about a field or a profession or an industry or an area. And in the course of that, you're creating a stronger network so that when someone does see a job opportunity that matches up well with you, they remember you and they're able to offer it. So getting clear on the goals is very helpful because especially when you move to the next bullet here, it enables you to target gaps. If your goal is to move into marketing and you only know 3 people in marketing in your network, obviously that's a gap, something to begin to address. And once you've identified the gaps, you can begin acting on them. As you meet with people, and I think this is probably a common term for most people that are on the call today, you're going to need to develop an elevator speech. An elevator speech is just a very quick, concise way of explaining who you are, what you're interested in, and possibly how can the person help you. And they call it an elevator speech because it should take about 30, 40 seconds at the most. And it's something that you get to personalize, possibly include some elements like a rhetorical question that really captures the person's attention. So as you build your elevator speech, I encourage you to test it out on people, maybe people in your personal network as opposed to your professional network, and just see what their response or their suggestion is. As you build the network, I've alluded to this before when I talked about first and second level nodes on your network. It's very important to borrow the network of other people. And by borrow, I mean in LinkedIn, for example, you can, and Facebook too, you can look and see who other people include as nodes on their network. And in LinkedIn, you can check out what do those people do, what's their experience, their background, their skills, their education, and so on. So reviewing the network of the people who are your primary nodes, identify people that you can borrow. And the way you borrow their network is to call them up and explain that you noticed they were connected with this person. It'd be very helpful. For example, if you could meet with this person and ask if your network member would mind giving you an introduction. It might be an email, a phone call, something like that. Oftentimes, in my experience, people will CC the person that they want to introduce so that everyone's aware of the timing of the email. And I would estimate, and maybe this is just my experience, but I would estimate that 9 out of 10 times, if you're talking to someone who's an active node on your network and you ask if you can borrow their network by talking to someone, 9 out of 10 times they're going to say, fine, great, I'd be happy to do this for you. If your denial rate is significantly higher than 10%, then I think you need to ask yourself, what is it that I'm not doing or should be doing that is getting in the way of borrowing the network of others? And I just would point out that the key issue here is that when you borrow someone else's network, you're potentially damaging their credibility with that person. So if there's some hesitation in terms of making that referral, you need to do some thinking about what could be getting in the way. Have you borrowed it before and you haven't followed through? The person thought you were abrasive or rude, or sent a thank you note, that sort of thing. It's gonna affect any future requests. Okay, so I'm going to shift to the third stage of networking. And this is a stage that actually I put the most emphasis on. I want to make sure that if I've done the work of assessing and building my network, I want to make sure that network is going to work for me and that I keep it alive. So there's a number of things that I suggest about this. The first is very basic, and it's based on the metaphor of a computer network. In a computer network, the hub of the network pings the other nodes on the network just to see if they're active, if what's the latency in getting back a signal. And so I'd like to suggest you think about how often you're pinging the network. And it could be the simplest things. It could be just, I thought about you the other day. I saw this news story, and I thought of you, wanted to check in, see how you're doing. In the process of pinging, you might learn that the person you haven't talked to for 8 months is now at a different company. And so now you have an opportunity to call them up, find out what's happening, how do they like the new company, and update your network information. Another important piece for me is what I call having the right stuff. And the right stuff can include things like sending thank you notes to people, sending notes of congratulations. I regularly do that inside my organization. When I see someone's been promoted, I'll send them a note congratulating them on the promotion, saying that I think this is a great move for them as well as a great decision by Bose. And sometimes I kid them about requesting that they make it clear that they owe it all to the courses where I was teaching them. But in general, I want them to know I recognize what they're doing. I think another very underused tool or technique these days is the handwritten note. Everyone uses email, and I just want to observe that a handwritten note is going to stand out even more in the days of email. When I first came into Bose, there was an orientation ceremony. I was presented with a package of different items, and I found out who had put the package together, this little box of goodies. And I wrote her a handwritten note just thanking her. I thought she did a great job, and it really made me feel welcome. And it's not someone I worked with, and I didn't see her for perhaps another 7 months, 8 months, maybe even a year. I happened to go over into her area, and as I was talking to her, I looked up and I noticed that my note had been scotch taped just above her desk. And that told me something. People appreciate that level of follow-through and recognition. I mentioned this earlier, and that is another important part of maintaining is what I call mind share. Of course, we say out of sight, out of mind. This is sort of your branding efforts, and there's a number of things I think you can do here. One of them is just helping people. And this could also be considered having the right stuff. I oftentimes in my work see a lot of articles that I think managers might benefit from or might be interested in. And so I'll send them a note with that. And I make sure I don't use a sticky. I always write on the article itself. And if I send it electronically, then I write on it and I scan it. So I'm sending that article with my my note and my name, so that if they pull it out of a file a year or two from now, they say, oh, okay, Dave Crimmin sent me this. I remember that. So I'm trying to build mind share in that way by helping people. Another thing is enrolling others. And I'll just offer a very quick example of this. I once worked with a manager at Digital who built what he called his board of directors. It consisted of a few faculty members that he had in business school, included his minister, included a couple former bosses that he'd had that were like mentors to him. And every year, he would send out an email that he called his annual report on what he'd accomplished during the previous year, what he was intending to do in the coming year, what challenges he faced, what kind of skills he felt he needed to develop. And I don't know that he ever got the whole board together, but he'd meet with these people from time to time for dinner or for coffee, and he'd keep them up to date. And he told me that none of them ever turned down or dropped off his board. And he had this board going, when I knew him, it was for over 8 years, on this yearly basis, just enrolling other people and giving them a reason to have a stake in his success. I think that's an important part of branding. And my last example here, and I'm not being reimbursed by the Brown Development Office to say this, because many nonprofits offer this option. But when you give to charities, you might see that they have an option to give in memory of a person or in honor of a person. And I give in various ways to Brown, the Sports Foundation, the Annual Fund, and so on. I look for opportunities to use in honor of and occasionally in memory of, to thank people who've been a key person in my growth and development. And I think in all the times that I've done that, every time I've gotten a call, in some cases a lengthy and very, very beautiful call from people that I've honored or from the family of people that I've given in memory of. And I think that's the kind of example you want to think about. Okay, so let's pause for some questions.
That last point, I think, is really going to touch on some of the questions we've been getting, and that is about tips for introverts, because those are, some easier things for an introvert to do.
Oh.
But when we were discussing earlier, you had a lot of great tips for introverts. Can you bring up a few of those?
Yes. Well, first let me say that in the bibliography that I passed on to Heather and that I believe she's distributing, there is an article specifically for introverts. There's also a book that came out recently, I think called The Power of the Introvert, that I recommend reading. But as a card-carrying introvert, I would just share with you that we live in an extroverted society. So just as a method of adaptability, you have to learn the skills of networking. And anyone who's been smart enough and talented enough and impressive enough to get into Brown has the skills to learn networking and to learn, or at least pretend, how to be an extrovert. In terms of tips, I think one that comes to mind that I came across recently was the idea of network in pairs. I don't mean go everywhere when you get to an event as a twosome, but networking as a pair allows you to go and tap into someone else that started a conversation, and then maybe they move on to another conversation. It's a good way to meet a lot of people in a short period of time, and also to back off and maybe compare notes, hear about someone that you haven't met, and be directed to that person. So networking in pairs, I think, can be very useful.
Dave, excuse me, do you know who the author of Power of the Introvert is? I'm getting lots of questions wanting the book.
I don't, but I believe that I have the title right, and I think if you go on Amazon, you won't have any trouble finding it.
Okay, is that in the bibliography you gave me? Oh,
I don't
somebody
think it
says
is.
Susan
Sorry.
Kane. Susan Kane,
Oh, good.
one of our participants, tells us.
Okay.
Okay, sorry. Another question. Can you talk a little bit about the importance of follow-through when you're networking?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, this, as my son once said to me, of course this is the brown grad son, Dad, it's not rocket surgery. It's not rocket science to follow through. And in fact, following through just has a multiplier effect in building your brand. So when you meet with someone, always follow through. Again, I recommend handwritten notes if possible, but even if it's an email, great, or even a voicemail that you leave for the person. And do it as soon as possible so that you're still fresh in the person's mind. I once talked to a guy who, as he was leaving, sat in the room where he had been waiting for the interview, wrote a note, and asked the secretary to put it in interdepartmental mail. So it's quite possible the person he interviewed got that before the end of the day, and certainly the next day. So follow through is absolutely important, and you can follow through in other ways that are further down the road. I met one fellow who was networking, and he would send out these emails to all the people that he had met with, just giving an update on his progress, and occasionally including an article or a story that he'd run across that he thought people might be interested in. And it was a great way of keeping alive his networking activities and following through.
We had a lot of questions come in about the bio when you were talking about that. What's the difference in a bio and a resume? How do you write it? Do you do it online? Do you have any tips for that?
Yeah, well, you could write it and then send it online. The bios that I've seen are written in the third person. Okay, could be first person, makes it more personal, but most of them are in the third person. And this is what I mean by the scope. It's not just a recitation of people's jobs and time and accomplishments, but can also get more into their overall interest, almost life goals. What turns them on? What do they have a passion for? Because I think that more and more we recognize that when you can get to the level of people's true goals or their passion and align that with a job or a position, you're going to have a great performer. And so I think more employers are on the lookout for what turns people on, what makes them tick, as well as or beyond a dry resume.
Can you talk about networking for different generations? Are there different issues or concerns or talking points for new alums that would be different, or for women who've been out of the workforce, or for older alums?
Well, I think just to pick one, it's hard, I think, for women or men who have possibly taken some time off professionally to raise a family. It can be very intimidating at first when most of your contacts over the last few years have been on a playground or a PTSO board. But what I would say for all of these groups is networking is networking is networking. and that you can practice the skills of networking in your personal network. And if you polish those skills, practice those skills, it can be a fairly smooth transition over. It's making that human contact with people. It's not just dumping all your data on them, but actually having a conversation and an exchange. And when I mention helping there, a lot of people build their network if they've been out of work for a while, build their network by helping other people who are in the same situation. So they set up a networking roundtable where people can look at each other's resumes, talk about interviewing strategies, even practice interviewing. So if you don't know of a group like that, try setting one up. There's plenty of venues where you can advertise the group, bring people in, and help them. And in the process, you're going to help yourself.
Oh, that's a really good idea. One thing I just wanted to point it out in our last webinar, Karen Hoffman really, tried to emphasize that don't negate your skills that you've earned and the contacts you've made through volunteering, because those are great, networks and viable skills that you've used.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see. I just sent you a question because it was a little more specific, but I think it's nice for us to talk about, and it's often what people are asking us here is, if you find some people in a large network, or say you find a second contact, or you find someone through Brunette, and you're trying to contact them, and you don't really know them, what do you see as the best way? What's your approach? What are some things you say?
This is a great question because, first of all, I encourage people to use the alumni directory to look for people in a certain company, certain area, and so on. But this is where deliberateness comes in. Ideally, you don't want it to be a cold call. You can do that, and I think some people are happy to get that. If you do, I would let people know how you found their name. That's critical. But when you've identified the person, I think it's time to do a little detective work and start looking for ways that you could know someone who knows them. And so if you see that they're in a certain class and you knew people in that class, maybe you contact them. It's a great chance to ping that part of your network. Ask them if they know this person. You could do the same using the information about their company. If you know other people at the company, you could ping them and see, do you know so-and-so? He's a Brown alum, but before I approach him, I wondered if you knew him. Look for ways to make it more comfortable for them to take your call or to set up a meeting rather than make it a cold call. I'm not suggesting you shouldn't do it if it is a cold call. If that's the only way you can do it, that's fine. But it's a great opportunity. Once you've got the target for this networking approach in your sights, use a little detective work or footwork to see if you can find a link. There's the old notion of 6 degrees of separation. And I think it's actually closer than that when you get in certain groups, like alumni groups. Who knows who? It's not a lot of steps to find a link that you have in common.
And then another one that I just sent you, what kind of advice would you have on using LinkedIn to keep your network established, or that maintaining? What do you have any special tips for maintaining your network, your LinkedIn account?
Well, here's a great one, I think, is you can send out a question. It might be work-related. I think it works better if it is work-related. You can send out a question to a number of people in your network where you're asking them, have you ever had to deal with this type of thing? Have you ever had to implement a new succession planning software program in HR in a company? I'd love to have your experience. I'd love to know what you found out. And let me just add one other thing to that, which I think a lot of people overlook. When you send out the question, let's suppose you send it to 100 people and 10 people respond, but they give you some really good information in response to your question. Take the responses and send those out to the other 90 and just say, I thought you might want, I asked this question. I thought you might want to know what I heard in response. It might be of use to you. So you're helping them potentially, but you're also pinging the network one more time.
Wow, that's a good idea. Another part of that is any tips when attending trade shows, conventions.
Bring your business card. Have your elevator speech ready. And talk about the weather. There's, I just heard this the other day. Someone said to me, everybody talks about the weather, but no one ever does anything about it.
Yeah.
Well, it's based on the idea that everyone does talk about the weather because everyone experiences the weather. So when you're at a trade show, I think it helps not to be seen as someone who's just desperately grabbing lapels and making an elevator speech, but just look for ways to chat with people at the coffee table, in the elevator. Someone who's got a New England Patriots jacket on. Talk about whether they should pay Wes Welcome or whatever. I think that it's when we just network in a personal way that we can uncover a lot of leads and contacts in a professional way.
And also back to that being helpful. What do you have to offer people? Because then you've created a relationship, not just a request.
So what do you have to offer?
To people, or asking what other people need for help, or what are they interested in? That you're offering help. You're being a resource.
Okay, here's a great example of this, and this will probably be my last example. But a year or so ago, I got a call from a friend of mine who I consider to be the best networker I've ever met, and he said, Dave, I talked to this, I know this young woman, and she's interested in getting into some form of training and development, maybe management education. Would you be willing to give her a little time? I said, sure, have her call me up. And so I got the call. I met with the person over a cup of coffee here at work. And at the end of the half hour, I have some materials that I share with people regularly about my field. So I'd given it that. And as we were leaving, I said, how do you know Ed? And she said to me, well, I met him at TJ Maxx. I said, what? She said, yeah, I was shopping and we struck up a conversation and I told him I was interested in getting this field. He said, I have just the guy to talk to you. And so I thought, okay, Ed, you owe me one for this one. But my point about this is that you can use your network to help other people. You can put other people in contact with people you know as a way of helping them. And what that does is it leverages your network. So I'm sure that young woman is now part of Ed's network. Okay? And Ed now probably knows that he owes me one. So if I run across someone and I send them to Ed, he's going to give him half an hour of his time because he owes me one. And that's this whole idea of reciprocity that's the foundation of any network. So am I still driving, Heather?
You're still driving. I was about to say, that sounds like a good cue for you to go to your next slide.
Yeah. Let me just show you what a good networker my friend Ed is. And and I have to use this slide when I talk about networking because Ed practically got shot in trying to get this photograph with Ronald Reagan out in Idaho. But it's one of the key things that all networkers have to be able to do well. And that is, you have to take initiative. You have to push forward and get a photo with the president if that's what you want. Okay?
Okay. Do you want to make any points about the characteristics of networking?
If we have time, sure.
I'll
just quickly note a few of them. This is based on my own personal experience. The first one is taking initiative. This is Ed, out in Idaho, running across the street with a camera in his hand, yelling, "Just one shot, Mr. President, just one shot." He's lucky he didn't get killed, but he pulled it off. You have to take initiative to network. You can't wait for the network to come to you. And I think a big piece of it is being curious, wanting to learn about things, being curious about other people and their story. I mentioned this idea of reciprocity. I think reciprocity is the key of networking. If people perceive that the only reason you're talking to them is to get a job and you have no interest in them whatsoever, you don't follow up, you don't even thank them, I think you guaranteed your network is not going to be as robust and helpful as you'd like it to be. One of the key things that people who study influence have noticed is that liking leads to influence. And there are many reasons why we like other people. A lot of it has to do with appearance. But if we're not in the 1% of people that are professional models, we have to look for other ways to get people to like us. And here's an interesting paradox. People like people who like them. People like people who like them. So, if you're not a misanthrope, look for ways to like people. Look for things that are interesting about them, that you can appreciate about them, and communicate that to them. And they will be more open to your influence and ultimately your networking. Of course, demonstrating respect has a lot to do with follow-through, being on time. In fact, don't be on time. Be at least 10 minutes early. You can spare the time, and you don't want to run the risk of showing up for a meeting, a networking situation too late. And the last one here is be deliberate. Think about what you want to accomplish through networking, and then that'll guide your actions. And I use a little acronym that I got from a fellow in sales one time. I asked him why he was so successful. He says, there's one thing I always try to remember when I'm thinking about achieving my goals. He said, see what makes the cash register ring and work backwards from there. There's a whole thing in education right now with, it's called backward design. So you feel that, what do I want the students to come out with, and I work backward from there. What is it you want your network to do for you, and work backward from there. So I think at that point, I'm going to turn it back over to Heather, and she's got a few slides to wrap up. Thank you very much, folks, for participating today.
Thank you, Dave. And if you haven't had enough of his great information, Dave, this is just a sampling of some of the resources that Dave sent us. Some websites, obviously, we want to plug ourselves in there. A couple of his favorite articles, but of course he's already listed a book. And thank you to our participants who quickly found it online, got us the right title, and we got it out to you. The whole list of references that he has, we are going to post this afternoon on our Facebook page, and I sent the link to you, and then it's on here as well. In terms of resources, at Brown Alumni Relations, we have wanted to provide you with as many resources as possible. We're not a full-service career center, but the way that our coaching program came about was really wanting to at least provide some resources and tools for people. So we took the 4 main components of career development and tried to give you some tools in each of them. There's an assessment tool in Focus. It is a little more geared to younger people, but I think it's worth the time. Also, we had a workshop on assessment that also provided some assessment tools with that. And of course, for really in-depth work, we have provided you with some great coaches. The second part is research, and we have a nice research tool called Career Search that's available to you on our website as well. And just want to mention what's great about it is, you can search companies, you can search locations, you can search careers, and all of the listings usually have some contacts listed, and it will then relate if you have those any contacts at those companies in your LinkedIn profile. So again, a good networking tool. We have our job board, and I just want to say that as of this morning, I had 554 jobs posted. So just check it out. A great way to use it is to set up a search agent. That way it will send you jobs that are pertinent for you or in your area or in your career field. You can get weekly updates. You can look through our employer list, see if there's anyone you know, see if you have any contacts, or if there's companies that you're really interested in. You can find out if they've been hiring through our board before. You can also easily upload your resume or participate in resume books. And also, we'd like to encourage all of you, it's very easy to post on this board. So alums, share your postings. Jobs come in every day, so we hope that you will check it out. And along with this great information on networking, we have other networking tools. Not only can you use the job board lists and the research from Career Search lists, but Brunette is really your site. It has over 5,300 alums who've said, yes, I'm very open to being contacted. So it makes it easy to send out emails. And also you have that extra commonality. And then we have very active LinkedIn groups. I think the BAA core group now has 10,000 members. And of course, I also want to mention that we've now started a Facebook page and a Twitter page just for career at Brown Alumni. So thank you for attending today. We will continue this series of the Career Coach webinar. Our next speaker will be Peter Bopp, and we actually spoke yesterday, and he's inspiring, and he's going to have lots of great information for you and generate a lot of great ideas. And then we have Sarah Goldberg-Benenson, and she's very excited. And the benefit for Dave and then Peter and Sarah is that as we've held the series, they can sort of see what people are wanting and target a little bit. So Sarah's going to bring in some interviewing tips to her webinar as well. I see a couple of people are asking for connections. How do I find things? If you'd like to contact Dave, here is his email address. You can see what a great Brown alum he is. He even has it in his email address. If you have any questions about Alumni Career Services, please contact anyone on our staff, Eve Ornstead, myself, or my coworker, Donna Curry. As I said, we now post jobs and information on our Brown Alumni Career Twitter account, and we will post the reference list from Dave on our Facebook account. Hopefully I'll get it up this afternoon. Okay, Dave, thank you so much for helping us out today.
Thank you.
All right, goodbye, everybody.